So if you're looking for a sample application that demonstrates using the NEAppPushProvider, they have that here. And I mean, if you just Google any or Safari search NEAppPushProvider, the code page, I think that you have that in the description for the meeting. That'll take you here to the definition for the class. But at the bottom, they have the like see also, and then they have these two resources here. So here you can download the code sample. So I can kind of show you a little bit what that code sample looks like. But just again, brief overview. The point of this is to be able to maintain a persistent network connection, even when things are like it's going to sleep, or your app UI has been sent to background, or it's like completely closed. And there's other ways to do that in other circumstances for like music streaming apps, stuff like that. But this is more specifically for like messaging and then also like voice calling. We have messaging, but we're not using exactly the same model they're providing. We have our own like sort of custom local notification messages because they have different information and stuff like that. And then the other piece I wanted to say about that. With that persistent network connection, technically anytime that you're receiving like keep alive and stuff like that from the server, like in between those times, like your socket still gets, it doesn't get like scavenged, but it does get basically suspended. So you can't keep your socket alive from the app side. The server has to keep poking you to keep that connection alive, which some of you may be a thing that you like already very familiar with to deal with all the time, but it was a little bit of a curveball for us when we were dealing with it. So that was kind of fun. So just a little forewarning on that piece of it. That was an interesting discovery. Okay, so let's see if I can pull up the right one for you here. Yeah, this is the guy. Okay, so this is basically what the code sample looks like. And it has two targets. Let's see, let's get back. This is getting weird. The little thingy is in my way. There we go. Alrighty. Okay, cool. So you've got your main application target, and then you have your push provider, which is basically a network extension. So if you were to try to create like a new object, you would have network extensions in here. And then I don't think you use network extension directly. You always have to like subclass it as a specific type of network extension, if I remember this right. The other curveball with using the NEAppPushProvider is the signing and entitlement is really fun. So I couldn't use automatic signing, or maybe I just didn't know how at the time, because it requires like a special entitlement. I'm using air quotes. I don't know if you guys can see me while I'm presenting, but and you have to do that through the portal. So there's two different portals, right? Because there's the there's the developer site, and then there's like your App Connect site. So I think it's through the developer site where you set up like your certificates and everything. Let me see if I can find a sample of that for you. Maybe not. Let's see if it's in here. They did do a talk, and there's like a video and everything, but it's fun trying to track it back down again. Let's see it there. No. Okay. Well, if you ever go down this road and you need help, I'll join the Slack channel and you can reach out. But basically, when you're setting up, I think it's like a new, what's the word? Is it profile or? Okay, I'm going to ask you guys actually. What is that called? Where because you can have certificates, and then those attached to it. Oh, go ahead.
Capabilities, provisioning profiles.
Yeah, exactly. So in that profile that connects like your developer certificate with your app certificate and attaches all the different like entitlements and capabilities that target is supposed to have. And so I had to set that up through the site and then install that and then kind of like manually select that. So it was a little bit of a process, and it was, this was my first like iOS app as well. So it was a very steep learning curve, to say the least. So some of you, you've been doing this for like a decade. So this is a fun little like, baby's first app to have to learn how to go through all those processes, because it's interesting. But let's get back to the code part of it. Here, I'll show you the sample code they have here. So okay, so then they have their app here, their provider here. The key things I should point out are, okay, so on initialization, they're using this settings manager is just a wrapper for watching user default key value changes. And that's how the provider is sending updates back to the main app. So the main app just kind of listens for changes to certain key value pairs, and it receives updates on certain statuses and stuff that way. And then I just like expanded that by adding a bunch of other ones on my end. The provider can also listen to it, but the main part, the main way to communicate to the provider is through pushing a new configuration. So on the app itself, there is should be a configuration manager. Okay. So the thing they're introducing here is this, where is this provider configuration, which it's just like a key value dictionary basically, but it has a couple special functions to push that through. So let's see. There's a couple of key pieces here. Of course, without losing your mind. Okay, so when you have that provider target, you take the package name for that provider target and you have to include it as your bundle identifier, your provider bundle identifier, so that this manager knows what it's trying to push these configuration changes to. And like some of this, like I feel if you haven't messed with this before and you're a little bit lost in all these things I'm scrolling through, like it's definitely going to make more sense if you are going through, the sample code on your own, right, and playing with it. But okay, so the save function is how it is sending new push manager save. Okay, so then this is an overload. Find the next save. Okay, save to preferences. Okay, save to preferences, let's find that, right? So there's all these overloads to push all this stuff down, and eventually you get to that sort of key method that's part of this push manager class that will allow you to communicate with the framework. And you're not even really directly like touching the provider. You're actually just like sending this little like configuration thing up to the framework, and it might do something with it or it might not. Like you're kind of at the mercy of the framework here. So let me find that. Save to preferences. Oh, is it just, this might be baked in at this point. So let's see if we can find it. Okay, great. So you can see this like NEAppPushManager class right here, and then you can see, oh, this is a good point too. This is for iOS 14 and later. So this was not available before that. Part of the reason is because there was another way to do this before iOS 14. I think they deprecated that in 13. And so for people who couldn't access APNS but needed to be able to have like messaging services coming from like a private server or something, they had to kind of add this. Okay, so you can kind of see here, save to preferences. How are we doing on time, by the way? I feel like I'm already burning half of it.
You have 15 seconds.
Oh, okay. Well, Cliff notes, you send this up, and if the framework likes what you have, it uses that configuration to start this provider. The provider runs on its own thread, and it's like this long-running thing that exists beyond the life of your UI. So your UI can be backgrounded. They can close the UI. the provider still runs. Some other interesting just highlights about this are that the provider watches your SSID. So you have to provide like your Wi-Fi network name or a list of Wi-Fi network names for it to watch, because it actually has lifecycle hooks built into watching that network connection and like restarting when you get back on that private network again, or stopping when the network is timed out or when the network's not available. And then there's certain callbacks that you can access on the provider to handle those situations. So I should have really curated this to be a much shorter, like high level talk, but essentially, like if you're interested in this and it's something that you have to, work with, just, Google the NEAppPushProvider and look at that sample code, and it kind of like walks you through it. There's a video on the, what is it called? The WWDC, right? That has a little bit of a walkthrough of that as well. But you're not going to learn as much as just like dealing with that like sample code and kind of picking it apart. So I guess I'll open it up to questions.
Like at a high level, like how does like is there a server and a client? Like
Yeah.
when does this data get saved? How is the data shared? Is it through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth?
Okay.
Like, how are you communicating between devices?
Okay. So it would be over Wi-Fi, because you're watching an SSID. So you're watching like a Wi-Fi network name, and then you write a connection on the provider that uses like that network, whatever network you're on, to listen to like a private server that you have on the same network.
So like it's basically everything's connected to Wi-Fi. You actually are connecting to a server that is connected to the Wi-Fi, and the server is where all the data is saved.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anybody else have questions?
Yeah, I got a quick question. Is the data model that you can send up predefined, or is it like any codable?
So it's pretty open. The configuration, it's just basically like an open dictionary of terms, or a dictionary of like key value pairs. So it's really open. You just have to be able to provide that SSID list for the provider to be able to watch. And I think that's about it. I mean, it has to have a host and everything in order to connect to your server, but I think that's still like custom values. You see, I can try to track down the SSID piece of it to see. Okay, push manager dot match SSIDs. That might be, yeah, that one's baked in. You can see, so there's the SSIDs are hard coded in, right? You have to use this like array string, but then the provider's configuration itself is literally like whatever the hell you want to send. And then you have your own code on the start, a method on the provider that will read through, that receives that package of values, and you can write whatever you want it to do with that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, it's such a brief, like it's maybe a little bit more detailed. I should have just bit off a chunk of this thing and then just presented on that. So
This is crazy. I didn't know even this, like we had the capability for this. This seems like such a, niche thing, but it seems like it really solves a problem for like that niche. So it's really cool.
Yeah. And it was like the app that I'm using this for is a private app. It's not a public like consumer app, and it's a very specific case. The entitlement, I think I literally had to submit a request for the entitlement. I'm trying to remember. I can track that down because it is like super niche, because they just want you to use APNS if you can ever do that, right? It's just like if you don't have like an open network like that, this is what you have to do basically.
Oh, super cool, man. Anyone else have any questions?
I had one.
Good.
So would this work well if you're also in an environment with like low connectivity, or is that not the right use case for something like this?
It kind of depends on what you're trying to do, because like that, every time that you disconnect from the network, that provider is going to stop and you're going to lose like your socket connection. You're going to have to like run that back up again. So like this is for like these hospital environments where they have these networks. They're trying to do voice over IP on these networks. They're doing messaging on these networks. So like they have a pretty robust network that they have to do that on, right? If you have low connectivity, I mean, I guess if you're only doing messaging and you're not doing voice, maybe you can get away with it. You're just going to have a provider that's like stopping and restarting a lot. You're just going to have to deal with that. But I mean, I guess it's a doable thing. Our problem is that like we have to have like almost like 100% uptime on these things, like because these are like patient care requests. So we can't have patients like, hey, like I need assistance in the bathroom, and then like 20 minutes later you get a message and you reconnect to the network. Like they have to have, you know, pretty decent connection. There's a ton of redundant like communication devices and other ways that, you know, those requests are going out, of course, but you know, there's no point in having this app at all if it's not, you know, going to be able to communicate that in a timely manner.
Right. That makes sense. I was just curious because one of our constraints for some ideas we've had is if you've been to Maha or, you know, think of your favorite concert or event, like just, it doesn't matter how much you're pushing through, like it's always at peak capacity pretty much. That's at the top end of how many people are there and using the network. So yeah, always try to figure out if there's some other way we can build some of those pieces for those edge use cases, especially if we get like ticketing or other stuff. So that's where I was curious if that might make sense for this, but it sounds like potentially, but not maybe not fully.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a situation where this is expecting a more robust network just because like it's the thing that it's watching. I mean, maybe if you have multiple networks that you can kind of like fall back to because it accepts an array of SSIDs. None of our clients yet are using like multiple network fallbacks and stuff like that yet. So I haven't had to program that all in, but maybe that's like part of it, you know? I'm not sure.
That makes sense.